Hi, my name is Phil Patil, and this is my cyber chat on the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. I'll explain what Colonial Pipeline is and how the attack happened, and why basic security controls like strong passwords and multi-factor authentication really matter for critical infrastructure. Colonial Pipeline is one of the largest refined fuel pipelines in the United States. It stretches roughly 5,500 miles from Houston, Texas, up to New York and New Jersey area. It moves fuel products the entire way. On a typical day, it transports about 2.5 million barrels of gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and heating oil. That works out to around 100 million gallons of fuel moving through the system every single day. Because of that volume, Colonial supplies is estimated 45% of the fuel used for the East Coast. So when we're talking about Colonial, we're not just talking about one company, we're talking about the main fuel for the huge part of the country. The attack took place in early May of 2021. On May 6th, a ransomware group called DarkSide gained access to Colonial's IT network. Once inside, they deployed ransomware and stole roughly 100 gigabytes of data from the company. The very next day, on May 7th, DarkSide threatened to delete that stolen data if Colonial did not pay a ransom. In response, Colonial made the drastic decision to shut down the pipeline operations to stop the spread of the malware and contain the incident. The pipeline remained offline from May 7th until May 12th, about 5 days in total. Because the pipeline suddenly stopped moving fuel, states along the East Coast experienced fuel shortages, price spikes, and panic buys as people rushed to gas stations to try and fill up before supplies ran out. What makes this case especially interesting for cybersecurity is how Dark Horse actually got in. Investigators later showed the attacks used a compromised password for a Colonial VPN account. The password appeared in a batch of leaked credentials from a different breach, and an employee had reused the same password for the work login. The VPN account they targeted was a legacy account and is still active but not often used. Even worse, the VPN account did not require multi-factor authentication. Once the attackers had the username and password from the leak, they could log in remotely as if they were a legitimate user. The entire breach started from a single reused password and an old account with no multi-factor authentication. This initial compromise showed several core cybersecurity ideas in action. First, it illustrates how a single password can become a single point of failure when it's reused and never changed. If one password is exposed, an attacker can walk right into a second, then a lack of multi-factor authentication means with no backup control. A stolen password by itself is enough to get remote network access. Third, keeping a legacy VPN account active creates unnecessary attack surface. Proper account lifestyle management would have disabled the account when it was no longer needed. All this connects directly to what we've learned in class about password hygiene, multi-factor authentication as a baseline requirement for remote access, and the importance of limiting and monitoring user accounts in the user domain. Once DarkSide had access to Colonial IT's network, they deployed ransomware. Ransomware is designed to encrypt the victim's data so the system becomes unusable until a decryption key is provided, usually in exchange for money. DarkSide operated as a ransomware as a service group, which means they developed a malware and infrastructure, and they rented out to affiliates who carried out attacks and shared the profits. In this case, Colonial Pipeline faced the risk of prolonged downtime and the threat that stolen data would leak to the public. Under the pressure, the company decided to pay the ransom. Reports indicate that they paid around 75 Bitcoin, which is roughly $5 million at the time. Later, U.S. law enforcement was able to trace and recover the portion. The Colonial Pipeline case leaves us with several important lessons. First, multi-factor authentication should be mandatory for all remote access methods like VPNs, remote desktops, and cloud portals. It adds a second barrier even if passwords are leaked. Second, organizations need strong account lifestyle management. Disable or closely monitor any account that is not actively in use, especially accounts with remote access. Third, defenders should be monitored for leaked credentials and require password changes or resets when company email addresses appear in breach data sets. Fourth, network segments between IT systems and operational technology can limit the impact and compromise and reduce the need to shut down critical operations. Finally, incident response and resilient planning are crucial. The Colonial Pipeline case leaves us with several important lessons. First, multi-factor authentication should be mandatory for all remote access methods like VPNs, remote desktops, and cloud portals. It adds a second barrier even if a password is leaked. Second, organizations need strong account lifestyle management. Disable or closely monitor any account that is not actively in use, especially accounts with remote access. Third, defenders should monitor for leaked credentials and require password changes or resets when company email addresses appear in breach datasets. Fourth, network segmentation between IT systems. For someone going into cybersecurity, this attack is a reminder that our work has real world consequences. Critical infrastructure targets like pipelines, power grids, water systems, and transportation networks are increasingly connected and therefore increasingly exposed. In the Colonial case, attackers did not need a new zero-day exploit. They simply took advantage of a reused password, an old VPN account, and the active absence of multi-factor authentication. These are basic hygiene issues that security professionals could actually fix.
Thank you for watching this
Thank you.
video.